So let me first start the first paper, which is gonna be Bahadim is gonna present the paper. Right, yeah, okay, there you are. Okay, good. You see it. Sorry, did I pronounce correctly, Bahadim? Excuse me. Excuse me. Hajim. Okay. Discussion is gonna be it's also Shiri Sensei. It's actually joining the afternoon session. So if it's okay, shall we start? So floor is yours. You're gonna have 30 minutes. So go ahead, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone had a great lunch. And my name is Hajeon Dokjun Suran. I'm currently working at the credit risk database in Japan. And today, I'm very grateful for this opportunity today to present this empirical study. Are there any heterogeneities of excess sensitivity of consumption at the micro level? If so, why? As it was in the title, I attempt to see how consumption sensitivity to income appears at the micro level. And if there are any excess sensitivity of consumption is observed, what could be the rational explanation for that phenomenon? So the consumption sensitivity itself is estimated by the Mongolian household data, and I find that the heterogeneous excess sensitivity of consumption is observed across the income groups. And moreover, the richer group exhibits the higher sensitivity than the low income groups. So when the country's Mongolia's economic development is considered, this phenomenon, the excess sensitivity, can be understood in the context of this stochastic trend hypothesis. A higher sensitivity of the richer group is quite puzzling, but as I will mention later, this is partially attributed to the regional difference and also the exposure to different types of income shocks. So let me continue with the Mongolia's background, and then I will move on to the data, empirical analysis, and results and the discussion. Mongolia is a prototypical low-income, commodity-dependent country. This figure shows the share of agriculture and the mining sectors in a nominal output since the 1990s. The blue line is for the agriculture sector, and the red line is for the share of mining sector. So while the contribution of the agriculture has been constantly declining, there was a rapid boom in the mining sector in the early 2000s, and the sector has been constantly contributing around 20% of the output, 90% of the export, and almost half of the fiscal revenue. So one of this driver of this boom in the mining sector is that so-called Oyu Topar mine was discovered in the early 2000s. So it holds one of the largest high-grade copper and gold deposits in the world. And it's been developed as a joint venture between the Mongolian government and the foreign company Rio Tinto. So this mining project is quite unique. So it has these two steps or the two phases. The first one is the open pit project. So basically it excavates the hard minerals from the surface of the ground. Then the second phase or the second step of the project, that is the underground mining. So now it becomes a little bit more complicated and needs advanced techniques to excavate the hard minerals deep in the ground. So why I am mentioning this is that here I have the timeline from 2000, and very interestingly, this development of the mining sector led by the Oyu Topar project is appearing as a turning point of the country's economic expansion and recession. So let me elaborate this a bit more. So after the discovery of this Oyu Topar mine, and soon after the first phase of the construction project started in 2009, the economy entered a boom period. So in the left-hand side figure shows the foreign direct investment. I'm sorry, it's a little bit difficult to see, but there was a huge FDI flowed in around from 2009 to 2012 associated with the first phase of the construction process. So this FDI came in to finance the first phase of the project. And furthermore, with the relatively stable macroeconomic conditions and expected revenue from the mining sector, the government succeeded in issuing the very first sovereign bond to the international capital market. So this right figure shows the total foreign debt, and its components are depicted in the blue, red, and green bars, which are the foreign loans, government guaranteed bonds, and also the sovereign bonds. So the government guaranteed bonds and the sovereign bonds have been accumulated since 2012. So after their first issuance in the 2012. Also, during this time, the expansionary fiscal policy was going on, and the mining sector itself was intensified by this increased number of the geological exploration. However, it was soon after this rapid economic expansion, the economy has started slowing down, accompanied by this government sudden announcement of the discontinuing the second phase of the project. So basically, it was due to the total investment amount. So as the initial investment cost exceeded the first investment amount for the first phase of the construction, the government decided to supervise the initial project, and then the stakeholders have to revise the investment term for the second phase of the project. So during this time, the features of the financial crisis were unmasked. So characterized by this rapid depreciation of the exchange rate, sharp accumulation of the external debt, and a rapid decline in the foreign exchange reserves, and the government off-budget spending was increasing rapidly. So basically, in the end of the 2016, Mongolia experienced a financial crisis, and with this amplified vulnerability in the macroeconomy, the IMF bailout package was implemented in the late 2016. So bearing this macroeconomic picture, macroeconomic fluctuation of this rapid economic expansion and recession, let me move on to the micro sector. So how the household consumption sensitivity appears at the micro level in this economy. So I use the household socioeconomic survey, which has been conducted successively since 2009. So in the data, I have the data from 2009 to 2018. And it asks the relevant questions on the household's monthly income and expenditure. And more than 10,000 households are interviewed every year. So this is a repeated cross-sectional data, so it doesn't necessarily follow the same households over time. So what I do is that I create these 5 income groups or the quintiles based on the household's total income. So specifically, I use the information of the 21 provinces, that's the administrative division in Mongolia, and households in each of these administrative division is categorized into one of the 5 income groups based on their the household income. So I use the information of 21 provinces. So if I follow this step, I can have the 105 constructed groups that I can track over time. So this figure shows the average household income and expenditure by income groups. On the top row, I have the lowest income, second income, third, and on the second row, I have the fourth income group, and also the richest groups. So the red scattered, I'm sorry, it's quite difficult to see, but the red scattered dot indicates the expenditure level, and the blue scattered dot indicates the income level. So for the lowest income group, we can see that expenditure exceeds the income level. Whereas for the rest of the groups, income and expenditures almost overlap. For the highest income group, in the early years, income level is a bit higher than the expenditure until around 2015, and then they overlapped after that. So in terms of the trend of this income and consumption expenditure, all the groups have this increasing trend until around 2012, and then the income and consumption are slightly decline or stagnated, and then they're kind of back to the slightly increasing trend again. So let me, this will clearly appears in the next figure. So this figure shows how the consumption trend is changing over time for each income group, basically 3 income groups. And the trend component of the consumption itself is extracted from the Fodor-Prescott filter to see how the trend is changing. The blue line is for the lowest income group, and then orange line is for the mid-income group, and the gray line is for the highest income group. So basically all the income groups have the same pattern over time. So they have this increasing trend until 2012, and then declining trend from 2012 to 2016. And moreover, what is interesting is that the richer group, the highest income group, they have the most volatile change in this consumption trend. And particularly their change is significantly higher and lower than the other groups in 2012, 14, and 2015. So in order to systematically find out this household consumption sensitivity to income, I follow the model used in the context of the risk sharing. First used in the Townsend, and then later modified by the Ravalian and Chowdhury. The dependent variable is the change in the log of household consumption, and the fixed characteristics of the constructed groups and the dates are controlled. So this model allows me to separate the aggregate risk from the idiosyncratic income shock, and later is captured by this coefficient on the change in the log of household consumption, the beta coefficient. By separating the aggregate risk from the idiosyncratic income shocks, the consumption shouldn't be affected to the idiosyncratic income shock, and it is expected to take a 0. However, if it's not taking 0, then it is serving as an excess sensitivity parameter. So Townsend's original work and then the later empirical studies, they used this strategy to, at the village level or social groups, such as the neighbors or ethnic groups, to find that whether those groups really offering the efficient risk sharing to the idiosyncratic income shocks. This table shows the result of the excess sensitivity test conducted for each income group. The blue circled part shows the significant coefficient, which indicates that excess sensitivity is appearing for all the income groups. The column 1 is for the lowest income group, and I have the second group, third group, fourth group, and the highest income group. And all the coefficients are statistically significant, which means that there is an excess sensitivity is appearing for all the income groups. And moreover, this sensitivity is getting higher as income group becomes richer. And for the highest income group, they have the 0.704, and it is lower than this mid-income group, but this is still higher than the excess sensitivity of the lowest income group. So So is there any rational explanation behind this excess sensitivity that is observed at the micro level? So in this regards, the theoretical frameworks developed for the excess volatility of the consumption at the aggregate level, this so-called consumption volatility puzzle, would offer very insightful thinking. So one of them is the stochastic trend hypothesis. So this hypothesis differentiates between this transitory and a permanent income shock. And it put the emphasis on the permanent shocks as it affects the output growth rate. So the intuition is coming from the permanent income hypothesis. So what is happening is that when agents observe that economy is entering into the period of, for example, high growth rate, then what they will do is that they will optimally change their expectation and increase their consumption and investment. The second one is the hypothesis is the role of the financial frictions. So it put the emphasis on the limited access to the international borrowing. And it is reflected by this introducing foreign interest rates or the country risk spread. So given the Mongolia's economic fluctuation observed from the 2000, the excess sensitivity, heterogeneous sensitivity at the macro level can be understood in the context of the stochastic trend hypothesis. The economic characteristics of Mongolia, that is the rising mining sector, driven by this discovery of one of the largest mines in the world, and sudden government announcement towards the sector seem to be working as a permanent shock to the economy. So when economy is hit by such a shocks, the agents, according to the permanent income hypothesis, agents will be changing their expectation on the future output growth, and they optimally adjust their consumption behavior. This will result in the excess sensitivity of the household consumption at the micro level. Eventually, this will lead to the excess volatility of the consumption at the aggregate level, at the macro level. So let me briefly sum up here. So I use the Mongolian household survey data, and I estimate the sensitivity of the consumption to income. And indeed, I find the heterogeneous excess sensitivity of consumption across the income groups. So this phenomenon can be rationalized in the stochastic trend hypothesis when the country's volatile economic development dependent on the mining sector is considered. Furthermore, I find that consumption sensitivity is actually observed to be higher for the richer groups. So this is very puzzling, as usually the low-income groups are expected to have the higher sensitivity if, for example, liquidity constraint is the bottleneck. So this is further explored in terms of the regional difference and also exposure to different types of income shocks. The model, the empirical model is extended with an additional dummy variable, which is a mine, in order to see the regional difference between the mining intensive regions and not so mining intensive regions. So this dummy variable takes 1 if the region is considered to be mining intensive. So the 7 out of 21 regions, that's the administrative division in Mongolia, the 7 out of 21 regions are considered to be mining intensive regions, based on the mining sector's contribution to the total output. The regional difference is only observed for this 4th quintile, the second highest income group. As for the other groups, I do not observe any significant difference. Furthermore, the income groups are studied in terms of their exposure to income shock types. So this is specifically how income groups are exposed to transitory and permanent income shocks. In order to study in order to identify the shocks, I use this information of the joint distribution of households income and consumption. So using this information, what is identified is that permanent and the transitory shock variances. So taking into account both household income and the consumption variance, I estimate the change in the transitory and the permanent shock for each of these income groups. The income group difference appears in the permanent shock variances. So in terms of the transitory shock variances, there was not really significant difference across the income groups. However, I did find the income group difference in terms of this permanent shock variances. So this figure shows how the permanent shock variance is changing over time by income groups. I have again the lowest income group, second and third, fourth, and the highest income groups are depicted in this table figure. And the one noticeable thing from this figure is that the lowest income and also the highest income groups have the most volatile change in terms of this permanent shock variances. Particularly, this change is dominantly appearing for the richest income group. So from this result, from this finding implies that this richest income group, they are the most volatile, they are subject to the volatile change in the permanent income shock. So the regional difference and the different type of income shocks, they provide this partial answer to why the richer has the higher sensitivity of the consumption to income. But as you can see, they are not really fully answering to this question. However, one conjecture is that usually the commodity-dependent country or the resource-rich countries are often characterized with this autocratic governments or the low quality of these institutions. So based on that, the direct or indirect benefit from the mining sector might be mostly shared among the wealthy hierarchy. So this is still conjecture, and this area is needed to be investigated further. But so based on the findings that I have found so far, this is the conclusion that I made in this study. This is the ending of my presentation, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Haryun, for the nice presentation. So discussion is gonna be Itsugo Shoji. It's gonna be Shoji Sensei from Hitotsubashi University.
Yes, I can do that.
Oh.
This folder.
Okay, yeah, yeah, version July 26.
Sorry.
Oh, no.
No. Can you do a full screen?
Yes.
No, really. You have to do a Zoom share.
Zoom share. Okay. I will stop share.
Yeah. Yes. And
Upright, yeah.
then make it bigger.
What's going on?
Great, thank you.
Okay. You can
Yeah.
use this part.
Oh, thank you very much. So sorry, I didn't. Shoji, you have 15 minutes for discussion.
Okay,
What was yours?
thank you. This thing? Yeah.
Oh.
そうですね。はい。
Yeah, we're all set now. Okay, okay, thank you. Yeah, first of all, I thank the organizers for allowing me to participate in this conference and giving me a chance to discuss this very interesting and thought-provoking paper. Okay, as a brief summary, this paper studies the issue of excess sensitivity of consumption using the data on Mongolian households. The data is stratified by region and also by income group. The data is monthly and starting from 2009 and until 2018, not 19. And the result indicates the excess sensitivity, the hypothesis is confirmed. And the most interesting result is that the excess sensitivity is actually more pronounced for high income groups. How can we interpret the results? Liquidity constraint hypothesis is probably not very good because normally we would think that the poorer households are more likely to be liquidity constrained. So setting aside this hypothesis, the idea of wealthy hand-to-mouth, I think it's usually the case that we expect the poor people to be more liquidity constrained. And therefore, they are the one who should be exhibiting excess sensitivity of consumption to income. So a more hopeful hypothesis is that the permanent income shock hypothesis, so to speak, and assuming that permanent income shocks are more pronounced or more important for richer households, in the case of Mongolia, we can interpret the previous result. Okay, so that was a very brief summary. Before commenting on the paper, you may be wondering, I thought this was a conference on international finance, the title said so. What does the paper have to do with it? And I'm going to claim that this paper is very, very relevant to the issue of international finance. So let me start from here. Thank you so much, actually. So starting with the issue of capital account dynamics, as the first keynote speech by Martin Uribe made clear, the standard theory of capital account dynamics is based on the idea of consumption smoothing. And recently, this idea has been criticized from many angles. And this paper, this current paper, casts a further doubt on its relevance because we see that they are not really smoothing consumption, especially rich guys. They have a bigger share of consumption in the country, and they are not really smoothing their consumption. Therefore, the consumption smoothing theory is probably not very good, right? As a related issue, there's a well-known puzzle in well-known empirical finding in the literature for the consumption volatility puzzle. For some reason, unlike in the case of advanced countries, in emerging economies, standard deviation of volatility of consumption tends to be bigger than the volatility of income. And this paper gives a partial. It doesn't go all the way, but at least if we think that the richer guys are really not smoothing consumption, that goes halfway toward explaining this volatility puzzle. It still doesn't explain why consumption is more volatile, but at least we have a good idea why consumption is so volatile in developing nations. Also, this also is related to the first lecture of this morning, but there's a big debate
there's a long-standing debate on the role of capital flows in the literature of international finance. Obviously, the traditional view is that capital flows are all good, and you should never regulate capital inflows and outflows. But there's an emerging new view, which since the late 90s, since the Asian financial crisis, that actually capital controls can be sometimes good. This view was represented by Martin Olivet's lecture today. This paper gives a further support to this alternative hypothesis. Why? Because if capital inflows produce a consumption boom, especially for the rich guy, capital inflows can be very destabilizing. So this paper gives additional reason to think that the capital flows are destabilizing rather than stabilizing. Okay, so that was the brief introduction. As an overall evaluation of the paper, this is a great paper, I think, using a novel data set that we didn't know much about. And the result was quite striking and stimulate our thinking about this issue. And I think the author's explanation of the hypothesis on why we find this kind of tendency is quite appealing, and for me it makes a lot of sense. Why do I say that? Let me go on to the next few slides. Something I learned in the past 2 weeks about Mongolia. So I started studying since I got this assignment. So the Mongolian economy is very dependent on trade, and export destinations are very skewed toward one country, and also export structure is dominated by a few types of products. And as a consequence, Mongolian economy is quite vulnerable to external shocks, such as business cycles of one country, commodity price boom and bust cycle, rise and fall of international capital flows, obviously, and finally, rise and fall of resource nationalism. Okay, so this is the composition of GDP of Mongolia. Exports is about 40% of GDP. So it's very dependent on international trade. Export destination, basically 75% is China. In terms of the types of commodities, minerals and precious metals, they produce some rare metals, which are very important, dominate the entire structure. So the author's key hypothesis is that it's still a conjecture, but the important hypothesis is that at least in Mongolia, rich people have better access, or they have the privilege to incomes generated by those natural resources, and also they are better connected with the government, perhaps, and therefore they have better access to public money, which has been funded basically by capital inflows into Mongolia. So basically, there's rampant rent seeking, and as such, so rich people are more. They have better access. They have the privilege, but on the flip side, they are more exposed to those external shocks, which tend to be permanent in the nature. So that's a hypothesis, and I think it makes great sense. So I encourage the authors to explore this hypothesis further. How come it's Mongolia? Okay. So I got the okay. Yeah. Worldwide governance indicators. Actually, this is higher the better. So Mongolia does okay with like it has a good election system, political stability is no problem. But in terms of control of corruption, Mongolia is below the median of the other country, or the other countries in the south. So finally, comments. Sorry. About the data. On the expenditure side, she uses total expenditure, which is equal to food expenditure and non-food expenditure. This includes durables, and this could be a problem because they may purchase like a Rolex watch or something and to accumulate their wealth, right? So at least I think it would be a good idea to focus just on food consumption, at least for as a robustness check. On the income data is the total income is defined as labor income, agriculture income. They put a lot of effort in estimating agriculture income because it's such a complicated issue. And other income, okay? The paper said about the content of other income refer to the government website. So I went to the government website. It's actually great. So other income includes dividends, but doesn't include like unrealized capital gains. And this could be a problem because, when there's a resource boom and there's a big capital inflow, there could be asset price bubbles. And then those rich guys start feeling even richer and they start spending. This may be correlated with their income. Therefore, this may be a good explanation for why their consumption is more sensitive to fluctuation in their incomes because their incomes are correlated with unrealized capital gains. Use of income groups. Obviously, there's a concern about the intergroup mobility. In particular, the richest group may consist of people who happen to be lucky in that year and or in that month, and there are a lot of temporary high income. So they're classified as the rich guys, but in the next year they may disappear from the rich guys group. So they tend to be more exposed to temporary high income, and that could explain their weaker response to income. Okay, I got 30 seconds or so. About the result, she emphasizes that this sensitivity goes up. So this is the main result. The sensitivity goes up as they get richer, but for me, it looks more like the exception is really the poorest households, right? And they are about the same as this guy. The richest guys actually exhibit weaker responses. So it may be worthwhile thinking about who are those poor guys. If poor guys are like farmers or they're engaged in agriculture, this may be because they are subject to more volatile temporary income changes because agriculture by its nature is bound to be affected by those temporary factors. And this could explain why those poorest households are exceptionally less sensitive to income changes. Okay, sorry, I've run out of time, but this is a part I still don't quite understand. This is going to be my main comment. So at the end of the paper, or precisely speaking in the appendix, she conducts this decomposition of transitory versus permanent income volatility. But here, she focuses on changes in income volatility. And I still don't know why the changes in income volatility is important. I thought that, I understand if it's about the relative level, if certain groups, the level of permanent income volatility is more important compared to temporary income volatility, I would understand it. But for some, and there's a paper by Pistolesi that you quote, and that was about the relative level of volatility. So I have to finish soon, but so this is the graph from the appendix that she also showed. So you can see this is the richest group, and this is the change in the volatility. And so she's basically saying that for the richest household, changes in income volatility is volatile. So it's the volatility of volatility, and I don't quite know how to interpret this result. By the way, the richest households are not the group that exhibit the highest consumption sensitivity. I would appreciate if you could make clear those points further. Oh, finally, if you do the Google search and look for excess sensitivity and high income household, this paper pops up first. And although the topic is quite different, but I think this is also a quite well-known paper, appears in some textbooks. So you should probably think of referring to this paper as well. But so basically, I think it's a great paper, and then has a rich implications for other developing countries, resource-dependent countries as well. And I hope that you will pursue this hypothesis further. And I hope this says thank you.
Have to leave it. How to pronounce?
I have no idea.
Thank you so much, Professor Shioji. So let's open the floor for discussions. Any comments, suggestions? Let's first, do you want response first? Yeah,
Yes.
okay. Yeah, sorry. They just first, Hayum to respond on the comments. Yeah, please.
Thank you, Jürgen, for the very insightful comments. And I just want to comment on a few things. As for the robustness check, there was using the robustness check using the food consumption data. So as far as I remember, I also tried the food data, and it basically gives the almost a similar results. So in the end, I ended up using the total expenditure. And as for the second point, the other income part, it is, as you said, it doesn't really include this unrealized capital gain and the loss. It's mostly records the government's, for example, pension, that kind of incomes are included as the other income. It actually asks about the savings and other interest rates, but mostly the households do not respond to this questionnaire part. So, but people try to answer for the pension amount, but not for the other items. And for the intern. And it's okay, then. Okay, thank you very much. For this third point, the intergroup mobility, and when I studied this temporary income shock and the permanent income shock, in terms of the shock variances, all the income groups actually exhibit higher this change of the temporary transitory shocks. So I thought that they are quite subject to the transitory shock, but in terms of the difference across the income groups, the permanent shocks are most dominantly appearing for the richest income group. But this is directly related to this part. So why do I use the change in the income volatility? Why I didn't use just the level part? This is a little bit embarrassing, but it's related to the technical part. When I did the moment conditions, somehow this level estimation didn't work. So I turned to the change part, and when I see this result, I figured that it still somehow implied that there is this variance in this permanent shock variance is particularly happening for the highest income group. But I will definitely work on this one and try to polish the estimation part. Thank you very much for pointing this out. Yes, as for the, so who are those poor people? So this is also very important thing. As you can imagine, the quite many people are still engaged in the agriculture sector in Mongolia. So they can be in this, they, particularly the low income people can be engaged in this agriculture sector. So yes, I still need to think on this point and how this group is featured and how they are different from the other groups. I have to dig in. This is my future to-do list. And yes, that's the end of my.
Just a clarification, so the median group,
Mhm.
are they most likely agricultural farmers or more like? What percentage people stay within manufacturing? 50%, 20%?
Yeah, sensitive. I'm actually not quite sure on those, but I really have to see the data again so that how much of these income groups are engaged in which kind of sectors. Yes, for now, it's just that households are categorized into one of these 5 groups in each region. So it can be that they,
Region by region,
yes,
maybe.
yes,
Mm,
maybe half and half in each group. Yes, it's not really like divided by the sectors.
mm. No, thank you so much for nice response to the comments. Shall we just open the floor for this comments, suggestions, anything? So let me just raise a couple of questions. So I think one of the approach, what you can do is you can have a moving average, maybe moving average of you know, the volatility. That could be one approach that will raise the concern raised by Sho Sensei. Second point, which is it would be interesting if we have a, I don't know, I'm not sure this is available in like Mongolia, like a distance to, you know, capital market, whatever, you know, how you have access to it, that's some kind of a binary, whatever. Some kind of indicator would be helpful in your research in order to test your hypothesis, right? To find a credit contribution. The last point is gonna be where do you have a bank account in, right? That could be possible. I think that Townsend has worked with using, you know, I think Thai primary data, which they have account, and similar work has been done in India. Sorry, I'm not a development person, but I think that has been done, which you can take a look at.
In terms of the bank of the account, the survey actually asks that question,
Yep.
but it asks in this only even years. So
Oh,
the survey itself is not very consistent. Some in even years, they ask these intensive questions like
Oh, okay.
banking account, loan amount. But then the other years, they just ask the total income and expenditure, not in very detail.
well, if you have this sort of a survey, it's gonna be symmetric across,
Mhm.
let's say it's conducted all the household in your
Mhm.
sample, then I think we can use it as a binary,
Similar.
right? Yeah, so I think that could be one way. It's like additional information, because this element is relatively persistent, right? It's not gonna change like every day, like you're not gonna, right? So that could be more like characteristics of household that you can check.
I'm sorry, could you clarify a bit on this moving average volatility that?
Oh, sorry, one of the concerns, you take a change
Yes,
of the volatility, right?
yes.
So one way you can do it is you can smooth the moving average, but let's say whatever the 6 months or whatever, like, you know, 1 year, and of the volatility.
Oh,
Then now that's actually solve the concern because you don't need to take the change, right? Yeah, so that's a smoother.
thank you very much for the comment.
Any other suggestions? So please.
I have a question.
Yes.
So you said that per household consumption that corresponds to income relative to other income group, right? So I thought that it's because of some system level of consumption. So for example, per household, we have to consume food just so agent, these kind of people that correspond to income show. this is what I have in mind. And I think in terms of international business cycle and consumption versus the part of their paper written by Quentin, Dr. and Paris, they use micro level data in emerging countries and they identify the source of international business cycle. Common people has the view or one concept. Like, yeah. So I think it's going to cite the paper. This is just a comment.
It might be more on the consumption systems.
Yes, subsistence level of consumption. So agents have no homogeneous preference. And
The consumption systems might induce this excess sensitivity.
so rural households cannot change their consumption because they have to consume a amount of food. So these kind of agents cannot change consumption when eating chocolate.
Actually, I think this one is more like they are changing their consumption so that there is this excess sensitivity to excess sensitivity of consumption to income. But I think your point is more on no excess sensitivity.
Overall agent.
Let me also refer to the paper. that you
Yeah,
mentioned.
Any other suggestions and comments? Oh, thank you so much for your Connect presentation and also nice discussion by Shu Sensei. It was very timely.